friends, please welcome back to the stage Simone Sanders Townsend.
All right, what a way to kick off the morning, right? I was writing down my gems in the back. Okay, we are gonna keep this party going. Our next panel highlights Black women's leadership in technology, because we know that Black women have a very rich and long history of technological breakthroughs, from Katherine Johnson's contributions to NASA's space missions to Valerie Thomas's invention of the illusion transmitter, okay? Like, the list goes on. Black women do, however, remain significantly underrepresented in the tech fields. We hold only around, what do y'all think the percentage is? Yes, 3. We hold only around 3% of tech jobs. And the number is even smaller when we talk about leadership roles. I mean, just to be clear, the lack of diversity, it hinders innovation and therefore the bottom line, because DEI is an economic, but never mind. Don't y'all get me started. Our panelists are working to change the landscape here, because when there's a lack of diversity that hinders innovation, that means that tech solutions often fail to consider the needs of diverse user bases. Talk about AI, where are they getting the data from? Come on. So moderating this next conversation is an all-in together board member and the chief of staff at the Department of Commerce, Ms. Tonya Williams. Please give her a warm welcome and the Tech for Good panel.
We're excited to be here. Wasn't the last panel fantastic? They were so inspiring. I could have listened to them continue on and on. So I'm going to tackle them backstage. But I think you all will find this panel equally as exciting and inspiring as well. We're going to be talking about tech for good. And as Simone ably framed there, technology is changing our lives. Experts predict that we'll experience more change and progress in the next decade than we have in the past 100 years. And so it's really upending our lives in so many different ways, for good, and there's some challenges, but definitely things that we have to reckon with. And our panelists today actually represent major players in the industry that are creating and platforming and investing in game-changing technologies that we all use today. They all play different roles in their respective organizations, but their portfolios include what we are talking about, which is tech for good. And that is using the technologies or the resources that technology companies have to benefit social and environmental causes. And so with that, I just want to introduce them to you so you can stop hearing from me. Our first panelist is Kemba Walden. Kemba's a lawyer who serves as the president of Paladin Global Institute. She comes to Paladin after serving as the acting U.S. National Cyber Director in 2023. She joined the Office of the National Cyber Director as its inaugural principal deputy in June of 2022. And while at the White House, she substantially contributed to the development of and launched the National Cybersecurity Strategy and the corresponding implementation plan. We have to talk about how many more of you were in that space one day. Next, we have Ebony Tucker. She's the global lead for exploitation and abuse partnerships at TikTok. Let's give Ebony some time. Okay. All right, just leave some space for that. I know. We're just gonna move on. She is an expert on gender-based violence for more than 15 years. She's been a legal and policy advocate for sexual assault survivors, creating state legislation and provisions included in the Violence Against Women Act. which I will give a plug for, which was my former boss, Joe Biden's signature legislation. And last but certainly not least, we have Olivia Igbokwe-Curry, who is a fellow All In Together board member, and she leads congressional and political affairs for Amazon Web Services. She also specializes in federal public policy, concentrating on artificial intelligence. So let's just give them a round before we even start. Fantastic. All right, ladies. So we'll get moving here. And as we were talking about some of the challenges, I'd love it if you would each, because you're in different spaces, just briefly describe the most pressing challenges in your sector or industry that you're facing and what you or your organization are doing to address those challenges. And we'll start with
I guess I'll start. Well, thank you very much, Tonya, first of all, for that lovely introduction. And thank you to All In Together and Black Women Lead for organizing this conference. This is my first time here, and it will not be my last. So the challenge that I face in my current role and the mission that I have throughout my career in tech policy is making sure that everybody's able to thrive and prosper online. Full stop. That's it. That is why I do cybersecurity. That is why the internet exists, is to make sure that we're able to contribute to society in a productive way. And if we are going to do that, we need to make sure that our digital ecosystem is secure, that our critical infrastructure is secure, that our kids can use technology and thrive, our small, medium businesses can continue to thrive, and they can do so in a safe environment. That's it. That is what I'm most concerned about. Now, how we get there, there are lots of policy options that we can talk about, lots of technology that we can talk about, but that's the bottom line.
Fantastic. Ebony?
Thank you. Thanks so much, obviously, for the great introduction and for All In Together, for having the event and for having me. I really think that, especially running or working on a platform that has so many younger users, the safety is key. So I'm echoing like some of the things you just said. I think that, for us being able to create a platform that younger people can use and feel safe and feel welcome is really important. So my role as running our partnerships, our global partnerships for exploitation and abuse, is really about trying to remove as much harmful content and to figure out, just being quite frank, what the trends are. People who share child sex abuse material, situations where there are people trying to traffic others. Those high harm issues are the ones that I work in and talk about every day. And so we really prioritize working in coalition with other tech companies, but also bringing in experts to help inform what some of that work looks like.
Thank you. It's really scary out there.
Yeah, sorry to bring up the super high harm topics very early, but
okay. You can talk about it with your fan club after this.
Yeah.
Hi, again. Thanks everyone for having me. So with me, I work so closely with policymakers and decision makers on the federal and at the administration level. And what I find really challenging is that you can't really regulate something you don't know. So it's teaching people. We were doing what is AI, and then generative AI came about, less than a year ago. And then there's this whole new caveat that we need to teach and assure that people understand while we're still learning as things are continually changing. And not only teach a subject matter that's really nuanced, but also through the lens of assuring that there is no bias, assuring that you are thinking of equitable standards and balancing regulation, innovation, and safety. So I think those are probably the most challenging things.
Right. And you all really started to hit on my next question, which is you all have sort of different approaches in the work that you do. You have partnerships. We've talked about convenings, and Olivia, you were just talking about advocacy and just working in industry itself. And so I'd love it if you talk to us a little bit about the approach that you have to the problem solving. So not just the problems you're solving, but why is it that you or your organization have chosen the approach of, start with you, convenings, and maybe you tell them a little bit actually about Paladin. I'm not sure if everyone knows about them as much as they do TikTok and AWS. So
Okay, so I'll start with what is Paladin and what am I doing at a venture capital firm, because I started my career in international development, living overseas and working in sub-Saharan Africa and the Caucasus region in Europe, and then somehow ended up in security and at Paladin. This is my fourth startup in a policy space. The first was at the ground floor at what's now known as the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency at the Department of Homeland Security. I was a cyber lawyer focused on election security, and I brought to that space the lens of all of my ancestors protecting democracy, because that takes work. That's how I started in the cyber space, pretty much. Then I moved on to Microsoft. They came to me when President Trump shut down, or the Congress, I guess, shut down the government over the border wall issue at that time in the 2016, 2017, 2018 space. They came to me and said, would you like to defend democracy? And I said, of course I would like to defend democracy.
Who says no?
Like, how do you not defend democracy? So one of my original clients is actually out here somewhere, and she's on the board. But I went on to Microsoft to do that. And then when 2020 elections were deemed secure, the corporate vice president at the time said, I know that you are kind of bored, so why don't you go and figure out how to get rid of ransomware? Why don't you spin up a ransomware program? So I did that. Hold
on one second. She just said that like it was no big deal. I just put a pause. You just spun up a ransomware.
I did. And the thing that was, the approach I took was, look, I don't know how to be a ransomware actor. I haven't coded anything since the sixth grade when I grew up in San Francisco.
Still impressive, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I took the approach when I was spinning that program up of really getting to know the software engineers that were assigned to me, really understanding how blockchain technology works, diving in deep, not being afraid to ask questions, ask hard questions, and coming up with a plan. And that plan is being deployed today. I teamed up with industry experts in the civil society space, international security space, law enforcement, academics. We formed a task force. We just called ourselves a task force, and gave the report to the incoming Biden administration, and they are deploying those policy options to this day. I testified yesterday about ransomware, but that was the startup of the ransomware program at Microsoft, which is still going on today. And then the White House literally called out of the blue. But it's a longer story than that, but to me, it felt like it was out of the blue, and said, look, Congress authorized the National Cyber Director position in the White House. Would you like to come help us start it up? That's not a thing you say no to. So I ended up starting up the National Cyber Director's Office as part of a team, to be sure, in the White House. Thank you. So all of those, the approach I bring then is to say, I didn't know that my career was going to be all about national security, cybersecurity, and I certainly didn't have on my bingo card that I was going to start up for organizations. But somebody asked me these questions once, and I realized, I sat back and got some perspective that I'd done this. And how did I, what's the throughput here? The throughput was, I work with teams, and I work with teams that have to have a different perspective than I do. So I am good in a room with everybody that looks like me, but everybody better come with a different perspective. And that's what makes it strong. That's what makes things work better. So I worked with engineers. I'm not an engineer. I worked with really noisy Republicans. I work with one now. He knows who he is. And when we come up with solutions that are that click, they are that much better, right? I work with people, communities that I did not grow up in, and we come up with solutions together. We find the problem together. We come up with solutions together, and we go. I happen to be a lawyer. I lean on that tool quite a bit, but I have to understand the technology too. So that is my approach. That is the perspective I bring to anything, any new challenge that I have.
So we're going to go a little bit out of order here since we're talking about public policy and partnering with government. And we'll go to you, Olivia, because you work in partnership with and advocate on behalf of your company with government. And so that is an important function and really a partnership that's necessary in this problem solving. So I'd just love to get your perspective as well.
I think that what's really important is something that Kemba mentioned, that like as Black women, we're not monolithic. So even if we're in a space together, we will have different perspectives. We are in a time, if we're looking at Congress, that it's incredibly partisan. So being able to understand who your audience is going to be key, irrespective of what your message is. I know that there's certain members of Congress that just being attached to Amazon will give them either a good feeling or a bad, for example, or just being, I don't wear my political hat or my political party preference when I go into meetings, especially when I'm representing my company. But you have to understand the issues of each member and what is really important to them. Sometimes those issues are more personal than they are political. Sometimes those issues have no policy backing at all. I think if you see a lot of campaigns running today, they're not really based on policy. They're based on either fear, or they can be based on personal preference, whatever is needed to really galvanize the voting population. So I think what I've found is that when I bring myself into a meeting or into any type of dialogue where I'm advocating for either my company, myself, a third party nonprofit that I may be assigned to, et cetera, or aligned to, I think that it's really important to know your audience and to know where you can find a connection, because we are in such a partisan place that you'll be really surprised at that there's always something that can unite you and the person in which you are lobbying or advocating in front of. And once you find that connection, it just makes the rest of the conversation much more palatable and easier. Finding a human connection or finding a political connection or a policy connection can all be very separate and not aligned, but it can also be very helpful just to find at least one of the three.
Thank you. And I think that's something that we excel at. I'll just say this just kind of off the cuff here, that, as Black women, we tend to know so much about other people, even when they don't know a lot about us. And so that is a real strength that we bring to the table. So, thanks. Ebony?
Yeah, I was actually just about to go there, because I think that's a huge part of it. For me, and I think there's probably going to be a lot of lawyers on stage today. I'm a lawyer as well, and worked in policy and direct services with survivors for a really long time. And coming into this space, I was also a consultant for Uber before this, and that was my first experience of having to talk to engineers who didn't necessarily understand any safety issues, and certainly didn't have cultural competence at all when it came to the nuances of those safety issues, and having to say, oh, you're thinking about developing this product, this thing. Okay, let's talk about why this is a problem, and then try to take a step back and figure that out. And for us, that is, and I think what a lot of companies hopefully now are employing, which is a safety by design approach of saying, you have to figure out what could be the issues and try to fix those before you throw something out into the world. And I think that is a great approach. We spend a lot of time doing that. And one of the things that I really do like about this work, but is so needed, I think, is making sure that voices that can have those conversations in a way that is not just from often a white male wealthy background lens is really important. And so being in the position to be an expert myself, and then also bringing in experts who will speak to the experiences of what I think is a large part of the user base that actually make the content that moves, that we're talking about the most, is really represented when we're having those conversations.
Thank you. And that actually dovetails nicely into the last question here, which I think is probably the most interesting. How many of you find yourself being the only person or one of a few in large groups very often where you are? Decision making, even fewer, oftentimes. So Simone led us off with some stats that are troubling. We all know that Black women are underrepresented in many fields, but technology in particular. And even though we bring a unique perspective from ideation to commercialization in technology, we're customers. Black people are the largest consumers of especially consumer technology. And oftentimes without, when we're not in the room, we're not in the spaces for creation, for commercialization, all the different parts, our perspective isn't taken into account. So you all work in these spaces, and we talked about this briefly in our prep about how you often are asked to shoulder the burden of, or explain or represent all the people, Black people, like you can know them all. Like they're not a diverse and dynamic group of people, but also face some of the gender and the effects of gender and race in corporate America. And so we just want to wrap up here. Maybe just tell us a little bit about your career journey. You've started some of this, and just some of the things that you have encountered, and just how you're dealing with that. And we'll go.
So I'll try to go quickly because I know we don't have a whole lot of time. But from the last question that you asked, you did ask what I was doing at Paladin. I started in development and got to a VC firm, which was not on my bingo card. Paladin started a think tank, and they asked me to come start it up. And I looked at them twice, and I was like, "Are you sure?" Because I don't do investing. I'm like, no, we have people that do that. Really? Are you sure? I'm not selling anything to the government. No, we have people that do that. We just want you to, we want to be a part of the policymaking apparatus that we know. We saw you in the White House start. You started talking about shifting the burden of cyber risk away from end users to enterprises that can bear them and buy them down, and then invest in resilience. We're the enterprises, we're the people that can buy that down. Ebony mentioned secure by design, safe by design. That was one of the principles in the National Cyber Strategy. VCs fund enterprise, small companies, tech companies that eventually get eaten up and used in enterprises and are used by consumers. At the end of the day, I'm sure Uber or TikTok or others had VC funding at some point. We can have, as a VC, some influence. Now, what I found after leaving the security business in the White House, and there were maybe 2 Black women, 3, that I could put my hands on in the White House on cybersecurity. I will say this out loud because I'm not saying anything that's news, I hope. But the VC community is even less. I mean, by a lot.
0.34% of funding. I actually have the number.
Oh, really?
Of money
Okay.
goes to Black women.
Right. So those that are called president or partner or something, I'm still looking. And please raise your hand because I need some company. But it's challenging, and my objective then is to make sure that I am not the last. What Vice President Harris said during campaign, I may be the first, but I certainly will not be the last. I bought 20 of those bins because I need to make sure that those that come behind are going to be able to find a redesigned table and find space at that table to exist in the VC world and the security world and law, whatever it is, to exist and to bring that perspective because it's necessary.
It's important that you're there.
Very, definitely very, very important that you're there. Yeah, I mean, my sort of move into this space is one that I still think is so odd. I am shocked most of the time that I work at TikTok, honestly, because I spent a lot of time as a lawyer, managed sexual harassment originally, and then went into sexual assault and abuse. More specifically, I worked at a lot of small organizations. I was the director of a couple. And then, you know, it was very strange to be doing policy. I was at the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, and Uber said, "Would you like to be on our safety advisory council because we need a sexual assault expert?" And I was like, well, yeah, but also this is such a strange place because for most of my career, this was an issue that companies did not want to discuss. I've been, you know, in state legislatures where, moms would come in with their kids and be like, oh no, don't talk to her. Because our table would say, the Louisiana Foundation Against Sexual Assault or Florida Council Against Sexual Violence or something like that. And to see like we're moving into this space where it's so much more open, I think it creates this other challenge of, is it open for everyone? And how are we making sure that we're having that conversation in the right way, especially with a lot of people who are not used to talking about the issue. So I love that this space is more open, that we're seeing transition from different fields into the tech and corporate space. And it was quite an adjustment to be in a space with so few of us, one that's obviously male dominated as well, because I think my first couple of weeks of work, I was like, where are all these men coming from? Because I worked in a space where they weren't really there for a very long time. So yeah, I think it definitely can be challenging and still is. I'm encouraged by how many of us I see as Black women coming into this space more and more and in different areas, especially at our company, I can see it. But also being cognizant of how much still needs to be done.
I think for me, throughout the trajectory of my career, when I stopped worrying about making other people uncomfortable I was comfortable and I think confident enough in my ability and the work that I do to know that I could raise X issue and if it made someone uncomfortable, we'll have an uncomfortable conversation that's still professional and then go on to the next, is when I really felt like I was properly fighting for those behind me, because I also am very aware of being a Black woman in a space, and this is prior to my current role, but being a Black woman in a space where you are the comfortable Black woman. And therefore, because you are that, and I have played that role before, I'm mad my hair is not curly right now on this stage. Should have worn my hair, should not have got this blowout. But I do think that because then it kind of would have made my point stronger. But I do think that, making sure that you are not that comfortable Black woman. You can excel. You can be in every call. You can have, your C-suite be the person that they call, but I don't know if we want to call it, not necessarily, I don't want to say as far as token, but you want to make sure that you are lifting as you climb and having these uncomfortable conversations that we are privileged enough to have with senior leadership, and making sure that, I'm not saying risk it all, but do it in a way that they know that you are not trying to be the only person. And they know that you are fully aware of the constant challenges that women and women of color specifically feel. And if you don't bring that to their attention, then it's very easy for them to continue to look for and recruit comfortable Black women.
I literally feel like dropping the mic. This has been wonderful. I wish we had more time. You all are amazing. I will be stalking them on LinkedIn. I'm sure you will as well. Thank you for all that you're doing, for your representation, and for sharing your stories with us.
You also have a huge role as Chief of Staff that you should be. Tonya is also a huge deal, guys. Chief of Staff at Commerce. So follow her on LinkedIn.